Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're going to finish chapter 12 today. We're just going to look at the last 3 verses. This is extending the judgment on the northern kingdom and extending the metaphor of Jacob as well. We're studying the book of Hosea. We're in chapter 12. This is part of our larger study of prophets to the northern, writing prophets to the northern kingdom. And let's go back to verse 7 so that we can get um, the gist of what he's saying to the northern kingdom. He's been writing to both southern and northern kingdoms and extending this metaphor, comparing the two to the history, the private history of Jacob. He talks about Jacob's birth. He talks about Jacob contending with the angel or with the Lord. He talks about Jacob at Bethel, seeing the ladder of angels and having God speak to him. And he's going to talk about Jacob paying for his wife in these verses. Let's go back up to verse 9, and we'll read through verse 14, but we're going to focus on 12 through 14. I have been Yahweh your God since the land of Egypt. I will make you live in tents again, as in the days of the appointed festival. I didn't mention this yesterday. The appointed festival will be the Feast of Booths, where they all lived in tents and sheds and lean-tos that they made out of branches and things to remind them of their wilderness wanderings. I'm sending you back to your wilderness wanderings, not to Egypt, but to Assyria. I have also spoken to the prophets. I gave numerous visions, and through the prophets I gave parables. Is there iniquity in Gilead? Surely they are worthless. In Gilgal they sacrifice bulls. Yes, their altars are like stone heaps beside the furrows of a field. So, um, Gilgal and Gilead, both places of historic significance, and now they become places for the people of God, and now they have become places of idolatry. And he talks about stone heaps in the furrow of a field. If you're plowing a field and there's a lot of little stones in the field, as you dig up a furrow, then someone would come behind and collect those stones and pile them up, and then you'd remove them from the field so that you could you could have a more fertile field the next year. And so they're common, all these heaps of stone at the end of each furrow, and then you collect them at the end of the day. And he's saying your idolatrous places of worship are as easy to encounter as the heaps of stones at the end of a furrow during planting season. That's how numerous they are. Verse 12. Now Jacob fled to the land of Aram, and Israel worked for a wife, and for a wife he kept sheep. But by a prophet the Lord brought Israel from Egypt, and by a prophet he was kept. Ephraim has provoked to bitter anger, so his Lord will leave his blood guilt on him and bring back his reproach to him. So Jacob having fled to Aram, there's so much significance in that. In the first place, when Jacob fled to his uncle Laban's house, Laban was living in territory that is now Assyrian territory. So there's the irony of that. Jacob fled to this to Mesopotamia, to this area, to escape violence. And while he was there, he found a wife and he worked for a wife and he got a wife. That's not what's happening now. So there's a comparing and a contrasting there. There's also the fact that Jacob is the one who got them all stuck in Egypt. And the Lord sent a prophet to purchase them, the redemption of his people. He purchased them by a prophet. The Lord brought Israel from Egypt, and so he brought them out. And then by a prophet he was kept. He was maintained by that prophet. So you've rejected prophecies. He's pulling together so many threads of their history and bringing them together, bringing them to bear into one big Gordian knot that they cannot slice open. And 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 we end up with God saying in the end of verse 14, since all this is true, I'm leaving their blood guilt on them, and I'm going to return to them their reproach. They had reproach before, I'm bringing it back now. I'm bringing back his reproach to him. There will be punishment. It has to happen. And we're going to get a more vivid description of that punishment in chapter 13. We'll pick up with chapter 13, verse 1 next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.